Today we are talking about a communication across the curriculum topic. We are here with Heather Bastion. My name is Lynn Wall. I'm the host for today's session. I'm with the Center for Teaching and Learning. And so, housekeeping, if you're having sound problems, you can use the audio menu link in WebEx. And if you're having WebEx problems, please do, excuse me, please do use the support number here on the screen. Okay. And with that, I will hand this over to Heather to start her presentation. Okay, you should be ready to go, Heather.
Yep, and it should be on the developing and facilitating peer review.
It is.
Great. So welcome to Developing and Facilitating Peer Review. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Heather Bastion. I'm Associate Director of CXC. And just a very brief description for those of you who are unfamiliar with CXC, we're a faculty-driven program that helps you intentionally and deliberately incorporate communication into your teaching to increase students' communication competencies and also their content knowledge. So it's helpful to think of us as we're internal consultants that are here to support your teaching of communication. And that's why I'm here today to talk to you about peer review, because peer review is an especially useful strategy to help students improve their communication, both their communication processes and their communicative products. Peer review, put very simply, is when peers review each other's works and ideas and they provide constructive feedback. That work can be written, it can be oral, it can be visual. It can range from more substantial work at later stages like papers or presentations, projects, portfolios, or it could be less substantial work that's at earlier stages like topics for a paper. It could be research questions, hypotheses, outlines, thesis statements, annotated bibliographies. It could be any of that. It can also be done inside a class or outside of class. It can take an entire class period or 5 minutes or anywhere in between. There's lots of flexibility in terms of what, when, and how long peer review takes. And I think that's why it's a very appealing practice for a lot of us. There are also a lot of benefits of peer review. We know from research that one way that many students learn well is from one another. They don't just learn from instructors or from faculty, they also learn well from each other. We also know that from research that students learn well when they're actively involved in their learning. Peer review does both of those. Research has also shown that peer review helps students develop self-assessment skills. It helps students have deeper engagement with disciplines and disciplinary content logics and interpretations, and it also improves the quality of final submissions. So research has shown all of that. One of the most interesting findings for me regarding peer review is that peer review provides significant benefits to student reviewers in that those who give and receive feedback have higher gains than those who just receive it. So basically what this means is that students benefit from peer reviewing and reviewing other peers' work regardless of the kind of feedback that they get, which is really an important piece, I think, of the peer review since they're engaging in those reading and evaluation processes. There are also lots of faculty benefits that are related to these student benefits. It's going to increase students' engagement with the discipline. It will increase the amount of feedback students receive. They're going to get more feedback than you could give them, right? There's only so much of you and there are so many of them, and they can get more feedback that way. It also distributes the responsibility for learning, so it takes that learning just from you and puts it onto the students so they're helping each other with learning and themselves, so it's empowering them for that learning. And faculty often report that it reduces grading time when they have students engaging in peer review. Now, there are these benefits, research shows these benefits, but still there are lots of concerns with peer review, and that might be why you're here with us today, and I want to acknowledge those. So there are lots of concerns in terms for both faculty and students. So there's a concern, are students capable of providing high quality feedback? So what if they give wrong feedback? What if they give bad feedback? What if the feedback isn't critical and they're just saying, yeah, great job? There's also the concern of, is this taking too much time? Is this taking time away from other activities? Is it a waste of time? Should we be doing other things? These are certainly valid concerns, and peer review can fall into these traps if it's it's not well designed and that there aren't certain steps taken. So what my goal today is to help you and students increase those benefits while reducing those concerns. So the first step to that is really, first step to sort of incorporating peer review into your teaching is to adopt and accept what I'm calling the peer review mindset. So this is the way you think about peer review. There's sort of two core components of this. The first component is to realize that peer feedback is not the same as faculty feedback. Students are not you. They don't have the same experience in the discipline. They haven't been communicating in the discipline as long as you. They don't have the disciplinary knowledge that you have. So they're not you. That doesn't mean they can't give good feedback. It just means that they aren't going to be able to give the same kind of feedback as you give. So one of the challenges and one of the things to really be thinking about when you're doing peer review is to be thinking, okay, where can students give good feedback and where do I need to give feedback? What are the aspects of this assignment or this task where they could give good feedback to each other, but where might I need to step in because I have this disciplinary knowledge? So that's one component to it. The second component is to understand and embrace that the purpose of peer review is to support student learning, not to create a perfect assignment. Assignments and products will be improved as a result of having improved student learning, but the focus isn't to create that perfect assignment. It's to support students' learning, and particularly their learning about disciplinary communication conventions. So you're helping them understand what counts as evidence in this field. How do we understand this evidence? How do we interpret this evidence, for example? How do we present our data in this field? What does it look like? What kind of genres do we use? So you're helping them learn those disciplinary conventions. You're also helping them learn and practice communication as a process. And this piece is helping them learn, how do I give and receive feedback? How do I give feedback in ways that are understandable and concrete? How do I ask questions to get the kind of feedback that I need? When do I take feedback and when do I not take feedback? It's helping them understand and practice that process as well. So this is sort of the mindset to adopt when you want to incorporate peer review. If you want peers to give the exact same feedback that you would give and to create perfect assignments, you will inevitably be disappointed with peer review. But this mindset is going to help you create reasonable expectations for peer review. What can peers give feedback on, and what learning do I want to take place? This mindset is also helps inform the strategies for peer review, and that's the second step. So the first step is sort of adopting this mindset, and then the second step is thinking, okay, so what strategies then do I think about for peer review? I'm going to talk about peer review strategies in sort of three different stages. The strategies that you do to prepare for peer review, so this is before students do it, and this is probably the most time and labor intensive for faculty out of these three steps. It's not terribly time intensive, but it is the most. How do you facilitate peer review? So while students are doing it, what are strategies for that? And then how do you follow up on peer review? So after they've done it, what do you do to see that that peer review is being used in productive ways? So to start us off, as you're preparing for peer review, before students do it, you'll want to think about the course overall and what role and how is peer review going to fit into this course. Some things to be thinking about as you think about how it'll fit into your course is you'll probably want to provide multiple opportunities for peer review. The way I like to think about this is the first time I did a peer review of an article in my field, I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I knew about the field, I could give some feedback, but I was really nervous, I didn't really know what to do. I asked other people for feedback and looked at other people's examples, so I needed practice. Students are the same way. They need practice doing peer review to get used to it, to get comfortable with it. So if you can provide even 2-3 opportunities for peer review, they'll get that practice and they'll get better at doing peer review. You'll also want to probably dedicate some time and space in your schedule for peer review. So thinking about a day or 2 days, what weeks you want them to do it in. If by giving that time in the schedule, you're indicating that this is important, it's part of the course. Another thing to be thinking about is discussing the value of peer review, what it is, and why we do it. This is an important discussion to have with students, so it's not just a thrown-in thing, so they understand, okay, why do we do this? How does it benefit me? Here, it's important to emphasize that it helps the receiver, of course, but it's not a truly altruistic act, is what I usually tell students. You are benefiting from this too. You're benefiting from the reading, from the evaluating, you're learning different strategies. So it's good for the receiver and the giver. You'll want to emphasize there's a broad range of peer review. What we do peer review for is not just to proofread or edit, but it's to help develop certain elements of learning. You might even want to have a candid discussion with students about experiences with peer review. Sometimes it's just helpful to throw it out there and say, okay, this is, let's talk about your experiences. How is this going to be different? What can we do to make this better? If they've had negative ones or if they've had positive ones, how can you translate that into their current experiences? You also want to be thinking about how you're going to teach and practice peer review. What some people do is they'll provide examples of helpful comments for peer review. They might hold a mock peer review session. They have students practice giving feedback. They also might have established clear expectations for student roles and behaviors, write down some of the boundaries or rules for that and give those to students. But actually teaching and practicing it is important. You might include a syllabus statement. I usually include something on my statement, just something about sharing work so they know up front that they'll be doing peer review in this class. You can include some language there about the purpose and value. This also allows you to talk about it on the first day of class, that this is a part of this course, this is why we do it. And the last thing to be thinking about for your course is that evaluation and grading piece. So how are you going to evaluate and grade that peer review? Usually people will do a credit, no credit, like you show up, you do it, you get credit for it, or you get no credit for it, but you need to determine how is that going to factor into the grade. Is it a grade for the assignment, a grade for the course? Those are all decisions you can make. Now getting into the actual assignment, how do you prepare for peer review for an assignment? It's important to start by identifying a clear purpose and focus for the peer review. And when I say purpose, you'll want to be thinking very carefully about what learning do you want to take place. Do I want students to learn about evidence? Do I want them to learn about analysis? Do I want them to learn about citation? Whatever it might be. And then a clear focus. So what are they going to bring into peer review? They don't have to bring in the whole thing. They could just bring in a thesis statement. They could just bring in an outline. They could bring in a whole draft. They could bring in, they could be practicing their presentation, whatever it might be, but what's that product? Making sure it's clear and narrow. From that, then, you'll want to establish clear criteria and provide a rubric for it if you want to. You can just give criteria. This is what they're going to be evaluating it based on, right? So spelling out those criteria. Those criteria are different than the criteria that you'll be using to grade. They're the criteria that reflect that narrow purpose and focus. After you have that, you'll think about, okay, what tasks are they going to complete in order to accomplish this student learning? And then you'll want to provide a designated time. All right, this is how long I think this will take. So I know this is a little abstract, so let me give you an example. Here's an example that would be probably a lower level course, maybe first year, second year, where they're just being introduced to writing in the discipline. So this is a research paper. And the purpose of this is I really want them, the learning that I want to occur, the purpose is I want them to really learn about selecting relevant and peer-reviewed sources. I know in the past students have a problem with peer-reviewed sources, finding relevant sources, and that's the learning that I want to take place. The focus of it is just going to be on the bibliography. All I want them to do is bring in their bibliography of 6 to 8 sources. My criteria then for them to be evaluating the bibliography is that they are peer-reviewed and clearly related to the topic. That's the criteria I want them to be using to evaluate this bibliography. So then I take it and I break down, okay, here are the tasks that they're going to do to get through that. First, they're going to evaluate each source to determine if it's peer-reviewed. And they'll explain in one sentence why it's peer-reviewed, and they'll mark a non-peer-reviewed source on X and explain in one sentence why it is not. So there I'm having them evaluate and then explain so that they're really engaging in that learning of what a peer-review source is and isn't. Then I'm going to have them think about relevance in a slightly maybe different way than they might be used to. Based on the sources you just reviewed, what topic do you think this person is researching? And provide a 2 to 3 sentence explanation of why you think that is. This is just based on like the titles, right? So this could really lead to some interesting insights. Then I'm going to have them share findings with their partner, and then they're going to develop an action plan for the next step. This is what they'll do on their own. They're going to describe in 2 to 3 sentences what research they still need to do, and then they're going to list their next 2 to 3 steps. And I'm giving them about 30 minutes for this. I've broken it down and what I think it'll take. So this is very detailed. It is very concrete. It is very focused on that student learning and what is going to get them there. This is really important to do in that preparation stage because I'm setting the stage for a productive peer review session. Because that's the next thing I'll want to be thinking about is facilitating the peer review. Things to be doing here is I'll want to first to sort of start the facilitation of the peer review, whether it's in class or it's on a WebEx before you're doing it online. You'll want to just start with that big picture, explaining and discussing the purpose, the criteria, the rubric, the tasks. You might want to practice or model the tasks, so practice together as a class before they do it. You establish the groups. You can decide how you do this. Sometimes I select groups. Sometimes I let them do groups. Sometimes I count. Sometimes I do it based on the color of their shoes. It doesn't matter. Put them in groups, usually 2 to 4. 4 is kind of the max for really productive interactions. You'll want to direct students through the tasks. As you're directing them through, you can actively observe the groups, offer guidance where appropriate. So I'm just facilitating, right? And then having a backup plan for empty-headed students. This is a much more hands-off role, right? In the preparation, it's very hands-on. You're sort of orchestrating it, putting that student learning in, getting the task. The facilitation, you take a backstage role, and you're just there to help them learn. You're there to facilitate their learning. So what might this look like with my example? I would begin the class by talking about, remember, last week we talked about what counts as peer review in this discipline, and this is what we said. And we talked about how you can determine whether a source is peer reviewed, and this is what we talked about. So just a big overall, remember, we talked about this. I might practice as a class with 2 examples that I pull up, so I just have 2 examples ready to go. We work through the process, right? So how do we know if this is peer reviewed? What do we look for, right? If they Google something, they might have to get their phones out. This I would probably assign pairs. I would just do 2 for this one. I just want one person giving them response, mostly for time reasons, but 1 check on this I feel like is probably enough. They don't need multiple people doing this. And then after I've done that, I would direct students by giving or saying 1 step at a time. You can project up like, okay, the first step, you're going to evaluate each source, determine if peer reviewed, and then you say, I want you to write 1 sentence, right? So then you let them go through that. You see when they're sort of finishing up, and then as I see them kind of finishing that up, probably about 10 minutes, I move on to the next step. But I'm like, okay, now that you're finishing that up, I want you to really be thinking about relevance. So based on what you just reviewed, what do you think this topic is this person researching? And I want you to write 2 to 3 sentences on that. Then I let them do that. Probably about 5 minutes, maybe a little less as they're finishing up. I'm like, okay, now I want you to get back with your partner and I want you to share your findings. They start with 1 person, a few minutes. If they haven't switched, they might say, okay, if you haven't switched yet, you'll want to think about moving on to the next person so they can share their findings. And then I move on to the next step and I have, okay, let's develop an action plan now, and I move them through that. I reveal 1 step at a time so that they don't rush through it, right? You go 1 step, 1 step, 1 step. You'll have to think about those empty-handed students. I would probably direct them to work on their phones or laptops to find sources at that time. I usually make them work if they don't come in with anything, and then I also can just check in individually to determine any roadblocks or just see what's going on with those. Also at this time, so as they're sort of working through these tasks, I would also just kind of walk around the class maybe, or maybe I stay at the front, answering any questions as they come up. But this is also a chance for you to record credit. So as you're walking around or a TA is walking around, they are just recording, did the person bring in whatever they were supposed to bring in? Are they doing the peer review? And you can do that credit, no credit recording right then and there. So that's sort of the facilitation piece. As I said, this kind of is one of the easier parts, right? Because you've done all the work up front. Here you're just making sure it's moving smoothly and you're working students through the steps. And then the third part of this sort of strategy is really following up on it. And this piece can look lots of different ways for lots of different kinds of projects or activities or assignments that they're working on. There's some that you can follow up immediately, like during that peer review session, and then there's some where you can follow up after the peer review session, and I've separated those for you. So what you can do is after they've done a peer review, you can ask them to reflect on the peer review process and or the peer review feedback. So just take a few minutes and have them write about what kind of feedback they got, what kind of feedback will they use, what kind of feedback won't they use. They could reflect on the experience, what was useful, what wasn't useful, how do they want their next peer review experience to be different. So they can do that. You can collect that or you don't have to collect it. They can provide feedback to the faculty or to peers on the peer review process. So they could give you feedback, what worked well for this peer review, what didn't work well, what would you like to see different in the next one. They can give feedback on their peer review's peer, right? The peer's review. How was that feedback received? What was clear to them? What wasn't clear? What questions did they have? They can do that at the same time. You can actually collect the peer feedback or the action plan that they've developed at that time. So you might just collect it and then give it back to them the next class so that you can give them credit for it. So those are things you can do at the same time that you're doing the peer review. At a future time, you also have other options. If they have action plans, you can check in on that action plan at a later date. So in 1 week, I'm going to check in on whatever your action plan was. They can submit a reflection with the final submission. So if I was having them hand in a final paper, I might have them reflect on what did you use for this peer review, what feedback did you use, what feedback didn't you use, so that they're reflecting on how they used that peer feedback with that final submission. They can submit the peer feedback with the final submission, so I want you to actually staple or submit through Canvas, whatever it is, the peer feedback. Or they can submit a final submission with track changes. I've done that before, where they'll track the changes so I can see what changes, I can easily see what changes they made as a result of the peer review. The last two options, you're not getting that reflection piece with it, so usually I'll pair those with a reflection that says how they did or didn't use that peer review. So our example, one more time, if I was collecting the revised bibliography before the final paper submission, so if I was saying, all right, final paper is due in 4 weeks, but I want to see your bibliography before you hand in that final paper, I would probably collect their peer feedback with that final submission of the revised bibliography, and I would want a reflection from the students on how they used or did not use the peer feedback. So I'd say, like, give me 2 examples of how you used your peer feedback, give me 1 example of why you didn't use, how you didn't use it and why you didn't use it. So then I'm kind of getting a sense of how are they using peer feedback or not. If I wasn't collecting the revised bibliography before the final paper submission, right? So I had them do this peer review, but they just got that feedback for the bibliography. I'm not going to see it. I'm going to get that works cited or references with the final paper submission. I might at that time collect their action plans. They wrote down their action plans. I might say, I want you to write down your action plans for me too, write down 2 copies. I collect those action plans. In a week, I would hand back those action plans, and I want an update. Where are you with these action plans? So that's just one option that could look a lot of different ways. So I know that I've covered a lot of different information. There are lots of choices and decisions to be made with peer review, but the biggest piece to really be thinking about is that peer review mindset. If you adopt that peer review mindset, it's going to help guide the decisions that you're making, the strategies that you're making, and help you set reasonable expectations for what peer review can do and what peer review can't do. As you're working through those specific decisions and those strategies for particular assignments or for a course, please reach out to us. We are, again, Communication Across the Curriculum. Stephanie Norinder is the Executive Director. Again, I'm the Associate Director. We are happy to help you work through those particular decisions that you make in your course. But I tell you, if you take that mindset and really adopt that and embrace that, it's going to help make those particular decisions easier to make and help make the peer review experience more productive for students and for you. So I do have just a few minutes. I'm happy to address or answer any questions that you may have, or if you can send me a message later, email me. I'm happy to address them one-on-one, or if there's any big questions, I can answer them now. Okay, so Celia asked, what's the difference between groups of 4 and the pairs? This is where I would think about my learning outcome. So my learning outcome for my example was I just wanted them to do a peer review. I see if a source was peer reviewed or not. And it wouldn't help necessarily in that case to have more than one person checking for that. It wouldn't make a difference. But if my learning outcome was for them to develop their topics, I might want them in groups of 3 or 4 because I want them getting feedback from multiple people. So the difference between them is that learning is, would that learning benefit from 3 people feedback, 2 people's feedback, or 1 person's feedback? And I determined for my example, really 2 or 3 people giving feedback wasn't going to benefit that learning experience. 1 person was good. Does that make sense, Celia? Yes, the difference is the SLO for each assignment. Like, what is it that you're trying to get at? And would the person benefit from getting feedback from multiple people for that SLO? Or is 1 person sufficient? And that's something where you're welcome to contact me. Again, I can help you work through these details and thinking through, okay, well, what would be the benefit of having 4 people, 3 people giving feedback? Because these decisions can feel overwhelming because it seems like there's a lot of them, but when you get into the habit of doing it and you kind of get a groove, it works. Online courses would need to use either an assignment for the feedback. Yes. Yes. We've had some so there's a peer review function in Canvas that people have been using to various degrees of success. But then you set up a peer review assignment for the feedback, and then they give it in that one. That seems to be the only way to do it in Canvas. You also can use Google Docs as a way to give feedback online. So where they would set up a Google Doc and then they would share it with their 2 peer reviewers and you. And then you can see what's going on in it. So that's another option for that collaborative work. So there's for the online courses, you have sort of the Canvas peer review function. They can email feedback to each other and copy the instructor, or they can create a Google Doc, share it with each other, and share it with you, and then you can see what they're saying in each other's documents. And you can also embed like a rubric in a Google Doc. I find Google Docs really easy to use, so that's a possibility, but some people are happy with the Canvas too. Sure, we can work through more examples. Again, for examples, I can run through a bunch of different examples with you. That's something we can work through. It's really helpful, I think, if you get your own assignment too in front of me, because we can just have a very brief, we can meet in person, but we can also meet over Hangouts, we can meet over the phone, you can email me an assignment, and we can just work through some of these things together so that you can see how it would look in your own courses. But certainly other examples, if I had time, I would give you lots of examples. Any other questions I can address now? Okay, again, thank you for joining us today. And please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, we are your internal consultants. We are here to help you become more effective teachers of communication. So don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to help you, and have a great Tuesday. Thank you. Bye.
And before you go, I just want to really quickly highlight our last upcoming webinar for the semester, which is the power of embeddable content in Canvas. That is November 16th. So if you go to teaching.uncc.edu to our calendar of events, you can sign up for that. So, okay, have a great day.